Welcome to Falcon Physician Review's Neurology Review Session. This session will cover brain anatomy. First, we need to show you the topography of the cerebral hemispheres. When looking at this hemisphere, you may say, wow, boy, there's a lot of different folds, but I'll never be able to remember the names of them all. But it turns out that if you have a structured technique to go after them, you can name all these. And you'll be surprised the number of gyri that you can name by looking at the different landmarks. First thing we need to show you is the interhemispheric fissure, which I'll show you at a different slide. That large fissure separates the two hemispheres from one from another. Right now you're looking at the left hemisphere of the brain. The lateral sulcus, or Sylvian fissure, is a major sulcus that separates the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal lobes. The central sulcus, or Rolandic fissure, separates the frontal from parietal regions, and I'll show you that in this next slide. We're looking at the right hemisphere seen through a mid-sagittal cut. The first thing you notice is a large structure called the corpus callosum. That is a major white matter tract connecting the two hemispheres. Other white matter tracts that connect the two hemispheres are the posterior commissure, seen here right at the superior portion of the four colliculi, and the anterior commissure. Next, you can see a white septum that separates the two lateral ventricles. It's straight down below the corpus callosum and is called the septum pellucidum. Above the corpus callosum, wrapping around it like a belt, is the cingulate gyrus. And also, just medial to that, is a vessel, the anterior cerebral artery, which feeds the medial portion of the two hemispheres. The aqueduct of Sylvius is a CSF structure that connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle, and it is seen here in the midbrain, in mid-sagittal section. At the back of the brain, we go to the occipital lobe, where the major sulcus is the calcarent sulcus. Above that sulcus is the cuneate gyrus, and below it is the lingual gyrus. These are important for where the brain processes visual information. And the final structure, we'll show you the hypothalamus here. Don't want to forget that. Very important structure. And the mammillary body. There are two mammillary bodies, and here you're seeing the right one. Now the final structure is the fourth ventricle, which you see here just in front of the cerebellum. Here's another unique view where someone is reaching into the skull and pulling back the frontal lobes, where you can see the optic chiasm and the anterior cerebral arteries coming around and towards you in the screen. Now let's look at a coronal section of the brain. Here we see the interhemispheric fissure dividing the two hemispheres. Next, you'll see the corpus callosum, the major fiber bundle connecting the two hemispheres. Next, you see an important structure in memory called the hippocampus. Just below that is the parahippocampal gyrus, and just lateral to that is the fusiform gyrus. Inside the lateral fissure, or the Sylvian fissure, is the insular cortex. And then again, you can see here the superior temporal gyrus, which corresponds to the primary auditory cortex, which is just below the Sylvian fissure. Let's look at some axial brain slices. Here the brain is cut from the eyes back to the back of the brain, and you're seeing a more superior image of it. And the two main structures that you see outlined here by the pink arrows are, one, the caudate nucleus bulging into the lateral ventricles, and the other is the putamen. These two structures are connected by cell bridges, which makes a sort of striated appearance. That's why these two structures together can be referred to as the striatum. All right, here we look at a slide that is lower than the previous slide, more inferior in the brain. And the main structures that you see here are the putamen, more laterally, The globus pallidus is divided into two structures. The globus pallidus pars interna, very medial, and pars externa, more laterally. So these are the main structures that you should be able to identify on a horizontal slice. Looking at something that we see more clinically is CT scan. A CT scan would be seen or identified by the fact that there's a very bright signal coming from the skull. An MRI scan doesn't have that bright signal because that area of that bone does not carry a lot of water molecules which can be imaged with MRI imaging. However, it is very dense, so it's radio opaque if you shoot it with X-rays, and therefore it will show up very bright on a CT scan. So what we look at here is a CT scan, and you can see from left to right we're going from inferior to more superior as a transverse view or axial view of the brain. This concludes our gross anatomy section of the Neuro Review.